I didn't do very well in school. I went to this kind of farming school. It really was. It was like in the States we have something called 4-H, and it's like mostly agriculture and livestock, you know. I just thought that I didn't really know any better, you know. I thought that was school, you know. I just thought I just thought school sucks, you know. But I always drew, you know. I drew a lot as a kid, and so when I was 18 and I left high school, I started working construction, you know, because I couldn't get another job because my grades were so bad, and I was working mostly labor. And I was working on these really big job sites with a lot of you know, guys who had been doing it for a long time, and I was always kind of amazed how old they looked, you know. And that they were all miserable, you know. They were just like super, you know. Not that I mean, my father was a laborer and, you know, a contractor, and he loved his job. He loved making things, and I can equate to that. You know, I can definitely understand, you know, wanting to work with your hands and wanting to build things. But I saw a lot of these guys kind of getting worn out, you know, because they were getting slightly older and couldn't do it anymore, and at that point, that early diagnosis like kind of kicked in. I was really depressed, you know. I was miserable, and my mother had a friend. He was a wildlife illustrator. He drew you know, pheasants and deer and, you know, things like that, and he worked at this local school in Pennsylvania, and you know, my mother was the one who was kind of like, listen, you're miserable, you're depressed, you're only 20, maybe it was like, you know, 20 at that time. She was like, you can't, you know, what do you want to do? Your grades were too bad, you can't get into a real college. How about, you know, applying with this friend Bob of hers? And I did. I drew some cats. I drew you know, I always drew. So there was stuff. I had a portfolio. So I went to this school, and they let me in. And that was kind of it. I started to understand, you know, how to put things together. I didn't have any real. It wasn't that kind of school. Like, we had one textbook. It was Gardner's Art Through the Ages, you know. So we pretty much stopped at the 70s. You know, there wasn't anything after that. And I did that for about 4 years. I just drew, you know, bowls of fruit, and we drew the nude figure a lot. And we had like an additive and deductive sculpture class. But, you know, and I did that for 4 years. And then I realized, I saw that Bruce Nauman exhibit at MoMA, and it just changed everything. You know, I realized there was something that was slightly past the 70s that really made a lot of sense. the time, where I grew up in Pennsylvania, it was like, it was rough, it was just like these guys who just wanted to fight all the time, and they had a lot of, they were aggressive and they hated everything, and they were horrible to women, and they had really narrow opinions about everything. They were confused about their own sexuality. I didn't know that at the time either, but that was obvious later on. And that Bruce Nauman exhibit really kind of seemed to me to be all about like all of those things. It was like, it was so, I got it. I didn't really understand it, but I had already experienced everything that Bruce Nauman was making work about. And I thought, it doesn't look like anything that I've seen in Gardner's art through the ages, but I can totally understand the kind of psychology of it, It made a lot of sense. And at that point, I wanted to do that. I wanted to do what Bruce Nauman was doing. I wanted to, work with materials that were already existing. I guess that was considered the ready-made, yeah, but I didn't know that. And I wanted to, but I also wanted to work with my hands, and I wanted to make things, and I wanted to just like push these things together. And I wanted to make work about like the kind of psychological experiences that I felt I had already dealt with in my life and potentially was going to deal with in the future. And, Bruce Nauman just became an icon for me. It was like, I told you how I then went to work at this place called the Video Data Bank. And I started to realize that, like even video art in the late 60s, early 70s, the Portapack stuff, that was about, artists and their manic, kind of work habits. And that was like being like actually recorded on like early video pieces and like early studio performances and things like that. They might not have had an audience, but they were recording everything. And they were so manic. It's the same thing with Bruce Nauman. Like everything that Bruce Nauman did and still does has this kind of drive to it, but it has no end. It's just this manic cycle. And that related to everything too. It was like, how I grew up and the farming community that I'd see them every fucking day, like plowing the fields. Jesus, hundreds of acres, just plowing and plowing and plowing. In the summers when I didn't go to school, I would have to work at this farm, and we picked, we mostly picked tomatoes, and you get paid by the bushel, and you just like work all fucking day. And, you have like these, things of, bushels of tomatoes next to you. And I didn't really mind it, but it seemed senseless. Like there was no end to it. It just could go on forever. But I didn't mind the activity so much. But so when I really started to make art, I didn't feel any different than when I, was working on that farm. But it seemed like an endeavor more than more than a kind of a job, Yeah. I think I'm an all-around artist. Yeah, I think so. that's not the politically correct answer, but yeah, I think I'm an all-around artist. I think I'm interested in painting. There's no doubt about that. But I think I'm also, interested in aspects of architecture and space and time that painting doesn't always have the most immediate, like it doesn't translate all of those things. But that doesn't mean that painting can't overcome some of the kind of trials and tribulations of, say, sculpture or photography. They're just different, and I think I tend to choose mediums because they translate. I choose specific mediums because I feel like they translate, the idea more than another medium would.
Going around the studio, you have quite an output. Is that kind of a working ethic, or are you just productive all the time, or?
I think it is. I think it is a work ethic, and that was kind of very early on in my childhood. My father's side of, my mother's side of the family too, but mostly my father's side of the family. If you didn't work, you weren't, you weren't really worth your weight. And I think that's just been this kind of conditioning that I think has easily translated to the way I make work. But it's also something later on I realized a lot of other artists kind of felt the same way, that maybe they felt a little ashamed of being artists or being creative, and so they kind of embedded a kind of labor aspect of it into it. And I think that's probably partially true for me. I think that, I'm a kind of manic, paranoid person, and working in a bunch of different mediums and always having a place to kind of always having a place to go helps. Yeah. For me, I think I can finish up a work or think that I've finished up a work and identify that in the work. If it's a painting, if it's a sculpture, if it's a video piece, if it's photography, working on a sound piece for a video piece, I can usually identify whether or not a work is successful by how manic it feels. I just had a great critic, Philip Dagan from Paris. He wrote about these, and we talked at length about what I wanted to do with these. And he wrote about it in relation to new realism, and that that something is happening now with a lot of artists who are making abstract works, but in all actuality what they're doing is a new type of realism. And it's a way of kind of taking a scenario in the real world and making what we would always up until now have considered an abstract work. And then that's like a kind of visual description of it. And I wasn't sure what I was doing with these, to tell you the truth, up until the time that Philip Dagan told me. But that's nice, because I knew that I was trying to get him to understand what I wanted from them, but I didn't really know. And I felt that way for a long time, and that's perhaps what we were talking about in relation to formalism or to composition. I always thought that it was just innate, that, things became compositional or formal because you know, an artist had the kind of knack for it, but maybe that wasn't what, you know, it, like, you know, Matisse's cutouts. I don't know if that's, it wasn't just formal, you know. And so I really like this idea that what I'm doing is an abstraction of something that I am experiencing in real life, but in all actuality, it's my kind of like visual description of it. But I think it's, for your grandmother, I would be fine if she looked at them as you know, formal compositional paintings. Yeah. I know that the artists that I've admired the most and who have become the most influential for me have done the same thing. I'm pretty aware that that's my desire. That's my end goal. Yeah.